invite to come and speak with everyone. Obviously, it's a little different to what we're all used.
Oh, sorry, everyone. We shall go old school and the PSTN network and see if we can get him to dial in. Or I could just go through all the slides and make up some story to go along with it, which would be evil. Right. So if everybody can jump on the tech Q&A in the group chat. Kiram's got a question. Does anybody have any suggestions on how to get markdown files on SharePoint? Presumably he means to render a markdown file correctly in a SharePoint page. John's come back with, don't use SharePoint. No, John.
Right, I'm trying to dial in if anyone can hear me now.
We can hear you.
Any better. Right,
yep.
Hopefully it stays.
How has the lockdown, so a quick question from Matt, how has the lockdown changed how we worked at DOG? Virtually 40% of our workforce was remote anyway. We had the office in Cardiff and the office in London. We actually closed down the office a week ahead of the government advice because we've done a complete remote working week in January as a test of our business continuity plan, with the scenario that we used was a zombie apocalypse pandemic forcing everybody to work at home. So quite literally, it didn't change us particularly much at all, other than we spend more time on Zoom. But yeah, on that note, Martyn, we can hear you.
Great.
All right, let's go.
Okay, good. So I think the lesson here is don't use a Mac for Zoom calls. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, next slide, please. That's just a holding slide. So what you know, one thing that I think is important to mention here is you know, I happen to just work for Virgin to be talking about this. It's nothing related to the current situation, really. It's actually a nice segue into quite an important topic that I don't really think personally gets discussed an awful lot, and should do, quite frankly. And I think what this situation has done, you know, more broadly, not just in technology, has highlighted that I'm sure many of you will be able to attest to this, that the way people have talked about DR and BCP is it's okay, we won't need it. Well, guess what? Now is the time when you do need it, and those companies that have you know, a poor or no BCP plan from a, you know, their technology perspective, and from a, you know, how does the business operate without an office perspective, are really struggling. So yeah, this is nothing directly related to the airline specifically, and what's been said and what's not been said. It's kind of relevant to everything really. And we do DevOps quite extensively in Virgin Atlantic, and this whole situation really, it just happens to be a pandemic as bad as most of us will have seen in our lifetime. But actually, it's not just that. If you're in a specific industry, you know, if you think back to something like 9/11 or any of the terror attacks, there were plenty of industries then that would have experienced very similar things. And this is sort of a look forward to, you know, what DevOps is like now, and how organizations are doing now, and effectively what that means for us going forward in 2021. It's by no means a doom and gloom session. I think DevOps will play a major role in rebuilding a lot of businesses, and we'll talk about why as we go through. But it's just intended to be a view of where we are now, what's happening right now from certainly colleagues and people in my network that I'm speaking to, and just getting a view as to what it means going forward and what some of the key things are that we'll need to look out for as DevOps enthusiasts as we move into 2021, where we'll hopefully start to see the end of this current situation. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a little a bit about me then. So what do I do at Virgin Atlantic? So I'm the DevOps lead. So I'm fundamentally the SME and responsible technically for how we do most of the things we do around DevOps. So whether that is process technology and an element of culture as well, and again an element of people. I also speak at quite a lot of events and conferences. Most recent biggest one I did was Cloud Expo, which was only a month or so ago now. It feels like it was a long time ago. And obviously, like every other speaker, you know, having to adapt to doing conferences in a much different way and doing events in a much different way. I blog a lot as well whenever I can, albeit a long time ago. I do have a book published on System Center, which is quite an old technology now. And I'm also the host of a podcast that started last week. The first episode was up last week, called DevOps Squared, which you can find on Spotify or iTunes. There's a couple of QR codes if anyone's interested to both the blog and the podcast. And there's also my Twitter up there as well if anyone wants to follow me, ask any questions afterwards, any follow-ups, that sort of thing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so just a real quick view of some of the things that we're going to touch on. I'm not a slide-heavy person. Most of the slides in here are really just a prompt for me, I guess, more than anything, just to remember the points that I was trying to bring across to you. But we're going to dive into four main areas, really. So the current state of DevOps, where we are at the minute, so some points around businesses adapting to change, which I think is very important at the minute. And then some of the current business challenges that we are seeing at the minute. And that's not just from an aviation perspective, that's from lots of different businesses and conversations with people in the network. And then how DevOps is going to change. And I have a couple of things more broadly. There's some points more broadly that talk about DevOps as a whole set of technologies and a whole set of principles, and also some more specific points as well. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so if we can wind back to, I guess, the start of the year, obviously most of us by mid-January had heard about what was happening in Far Eastern China. And I think, you know, quite honestly, everyone was probably hopeful that much like SARS or MERS, we wouldn't really see much impact to it. So if I think about most organisations and people that I've spoke to since then, oh, we just lost the slides. Awesome, thanks. So if I think about where most organisations are, so obviously one of the pillars of DevOps is around agile ways of working. If I think about most businesses that have been practicing that for some time now, they were starting to flourish. You think about all of the software engineering teams specifically that provide a lot of the technology that we're now using to help us work from home. So in the Microsoft space, you know, I think about Office 365, specifically the uptake of Teams. From a platform perspective, the uptake in Azure as a platform. Obviously behind there are teams that are working to these ethoses and these methodologies and have been for a long time. And those that are practicing DevOps, in my opinion, are well ahead of the curve in terms of their competitors. If you think about what DevOps actually means, there's obviously plenty of explanations out there as to what DevOps means, and you'll hear plenty of different people talk about what it means to them. I actually quite like a quote from a guy called Donovan Brown, who's the DevOps lead at Microsoft, and one of his quotes is that about explaining what DevOps is that it's the union of people, process, and technology to enable value to our end users. And that's a very careful statement, I think. And one of the things that I think is really good about that is it doesn't specifically talk about software, it doesn't specifically talk about engineering, it doesn't actually really specifically talk about technology at all. It just talks about getting value, whatever that value is, to your end users, your consumers. And I think what's really good about that is that if you think about the organizations that are doing that, like Microsoft, like Amazon, like Google, and many smaller organizations, many of them, which I'm sure you all work for, is one of the things that we can do, because we've already been through this to adapt to where we are, is we can adapt to change much easier. So when something comes along, like the current situation we have at the minute, it's very easy for us to shift what we're doing because we're so used to doing that anyway. We're so used to business requirements changing. We're so used to priorities changing. And that's exactly fundamentally for most businesses exactly what has happened here. And I think what the key message there is... I think what the key message is there for me is that value is delivered a lot quicker than traditional methods of working. So if you think about a couple of industries, a couple of examples and their competitors here. So I'm going to use Zoom and Teams as an example here. I'm in no way in favour of one or the other, quite frankly, but if you think about some of the things that have happened there, both those tool sets have seen a huge uptake in users, and especially Microsoft have been really good at publishing, as they always are these days, actually, how capacity is on the platform, how many users are actively using it. I've even seen messages on LinkedIn from people using Teams in their own organization as to how many increase in minutes there's been. And I think it's really good to be able to see exactly what's happening on the platform that we're all putting so much trust in at the minute. And the quality of what's released now, I think everyone will probably agree in the last few years, the quality of what you get released from Microsoft is generally pretty good. We certainly don't have the days of before where whenever we applied an update, for instance, stuff used to hit the fan. Those days are gone, and because there's a focus on engineering quality. If you move across to what's happening at Zoom, no doubt they have the same principles in place. and they have the same, focus on output. But what's happened there in a lot of ways is now the platform has become much more widely used because you can have free calls between two people. You can have up to a 40-minute limit on group calls. Lots more people are using it, and I think one of the things that's happened there is they've tried to scale that platform and tried to add too much stuff in too quickly without sticking to their fundamentals, and they've started to lose a little bit of quality. So it's interesting to still see both sides of the argument there of two organisations that are practicing this methodology, but I think generally speaking, what you'll see is the organisations, or what you'll see out of this, one of the things you'll see is that the organisations that are practicing DevOps are able to respond to changes in their own market and conditions within their industry a lot quicker than their competitors, will be the ones that will flourish and will come out with this arguably stronger, and the ones that don't will be the ones that really struggle afterwards. And then, of course, one of the things to add into there is the whole "you build it, you run it" ethos, which is not lost on most people. But it's a point I just wanted to bring up to keep in people's minds for something a bit later on. And that is something that is done through a lot of organisations at the minute. And that's arguably one of the biggest changes in culture, I think, when we talk about implementing DevOps within organisations, is that we go from having siloed teams delivering stuff to and supporting stuff all the way back to this operational person, this group of operational people are part of this product team, and they support what is released, and they're much closer to it. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so how do businesses adapt to change? There's not really, I guess, a silver bullet with this kind of stuff. It's mostly different for a lot of organizations, but I wanted to put some points up that are really things that the more mature businesses, certainly from experience, will look at, and things that they will be on the eye out for as to what's happening in their domain, basically. So the first thing is being able to look out for environments in your business. So I mean, fundamentally, to be able to excel in business, no matter what your business is, you not only need to understand the market, but you need to have an understanding of your business environment. So there are both uncontrollable factors, like what we are at the minute. They're arguably the most crucial ones, so social, economic, and political, environmental factors. You can't do anything about those as an organisation, but you have to be aware of them. You have to prepare yourself for changes within those setups. So ultimately, it's the socio-economic factor, really, I guess, ultimately, that influences the behaviour of your consumers, your end users, and being able to understand that and understand how you need to tailor your product and your offering to be able to deal with that is a really key thing, and that definitely plays into the part of DevOps and being able to quickly adapt to do something else to keep yourself relative. So accepting the idea of change, I think this is one of the biggest things in culture, really. You'll always hear people talk about DevOps as being people, process, technology, and then culture. And I've certainly always said that arguably people, process, and technology will come after you work on culture. And if you don't work on culture and foster that cultural change within your organization, then transforming your organization to a DevOps way of working is ultimately going to fail. I've not seen any organization yet where they have not nailed a cultural change and still been successful in what they do with that project. So I think it's fundamental and should be done first before you look at any changes in people, process, or technology. And actually, the people that fail to change based on that will ultimately influence your people decisions next, which will then go on to influence your process decisions after that, and then finally your technology comes into play when you know exactly, why you're doing it, how you want to do it, or why you want to do it, what you want to do, and then how you're going to do it is what comes last. Okay, so predicting and preparing for the future, but focusing on the present. And this is this is a really hard thing to do, really. So my example for talking about this is, I'm sure everyone remembers Nokia. So obviously Nokia went from being one of the biggest companies in the world for making mobile phones, and now they're pretty much unheard of. So why did Nokia fail? So they failed for many reasons, ultimately, but basically they couldn't adjust their business plan for the future. So as a result of that, they weren't ready for the biggest change in the mobile industry. Business means that you have to think about what is needed in the future before anyone else can. And those that can do that, i.e. Microsoft, Google, and Amazon when it comes to cloud computing, all of those organizations are now doing extremely well because they put a lot of effort in years ago before the cloud become really mainstream in making sure that those platforms were able to serve the requirements today of customers. And that obviously involves a lot of risk. It involves some very clever people to make sure that they back the right horse. So you have to improve and develop new ideas that can be incorporated into that plan, but you also have to have a bird's eye view of your business to understand what's going to happen next. And that will help you change the route in the shortest time if there's an unplanned change, like a pandemic comes along. Okay, so adopting another way of thinking. So to be productive and focus on your business, you have to keep away from the internet and social media. Right, we have a great scenario at the minute, really, where there's obviously a lot being said in the media about Virgin Atlantic as a business and Richard Branson as the group owner. I can only imagine from reading some of the stuff myself what the person it's intended at is thinking about some of those things. So you have to try and develop a system of thinking outside the box, keep your phone away from you, be creative and visualize your plan. You have to develop that 360 view, really. And what you have to do is, why do most entrepreneurs love to travel to lots of different countries, document different ideas that come to mind, so they can come back and apply that out of the box thinking. It's not unheard of for us to be doing something very specific in our culture, and another country or another region of the world do something very specific to their culture. And it's not until people exchange those thoughts and ideas that you actually see an application for it in another organization. I think one of the most obvious things on here is improving your internal processes. And this is really where continuous feedback comes in, I guess, and continuous improvement. The day you stop as an organization looking at what you're doing and trying to improve it is the day you start to fall behind your competitors. A bit like the human body in a lot of ways. If your internals are not functioning well, the external system doesn't really work either. So therefore, you have to improve the internal operations of your entire organization all of the time. Constantly look at those bottlenecks. Constantly look at what is stopping you achieving where you need to be. And then finally, and probably again one of the most obvious things on here, really is watching the competition. Right, the competition will often change as well as you do. As most of you will know, as being technology enthusiasts, go back to the hypervisor war of 10 years ago. Microsoft and VMware were both at each other for a long time. They were heavily competitive in that space, and they stepped each other for a long time until eventually VMware started to fall off and Microsoft started to move towards cloud. So there's various different ways that can obviously go. But yeah, the key thing really is that know who you're up against, what the expectations of the market are, and who your customers are. Those are all things that help your business adapt to change a lot better. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the current challenges at the minute for any business really? And I say this whether you're a corner shop serving your local community, whether you serve a town, a city, a country, or whether you're a global business. And I think the current challenge for most businesses is ultimately at the minute surviving. But I think there's some real key messages in there. One of them is business continuity, and we'll be talking a bit more about business continuity in a few minutes. Also expediting those products to end users, we've talked about as well. So all of a sudden, these organizations that deliver some of these services for us now have a massive opportunity to be able to expedite some of those plans. But that also presents itself with a challenge, because when we're in a time where we want to conserve money and our leadership teams want to preserve cash flow, because we just don't know what's going to happen, in the rest of the week, let alone the week after or in the coming months, it's really hard to be able to innovate at times where that climate is in play, really. And again, it's those organizations that are taking those risks and banking on it, working over a longer term strategy and a longer time frame that will probably end up coming out on top of this. But then obviously, while we're doing that, we obviously have to maintain quality, and we have to make sure that the product is relevant to our end users. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so how is DevOps going to change based on all of this? So I think one thing that's pretty clear based on this, and most of you that have been in technology for a number of years will understand exactly where I'm coming from. So there'll be an enhanced focus on business continuity planning. There probably is already now in most organizations. That's going to be more and more of a focus in the future. Have a quick think about what organizations specialize and deliver BCP. It's the big outsourcers, it's the Accentures, the Capitals, those kind of organizations. And you think about those huge monolithic machines, the traditional consultancy companies. How does that work in a DevOps model? We look to outsource part of BCP. Because don't forget, BCP, DR, they are fundamentally different things. DR ultimately gets our environment up to a place where we can continue to work. BCP enables us to continue to work. They are both fundamentally different things. Does you build it, you run it still extend in a BCP world? So there's many questions here, I think. How does DevOps work in this model? So if you think about all of the effort that your organization has gone to transform your team or your department or even your whole organization into DevOps ways of working, what happens when we suddenly bring a monolithic outsourcer in to look after our BCP? Does it still work? These are all questions that organizations will be, I think, looking to ask when they start to engage some of these organizations in the future. Or is it just part of you build it, you run it? BCP and DR is part of run. So should there be an expectation that this is just done as part of run within our teams? Okay, I think there's going to be also a further focus on culture to enable a shift in thinking as well. I think that's one of the biggest things that's actually going to come out of this, underneath BCP. I think as engineers, we're going to be asked to think outside the box a lot more. We're going to be asked to think, about more scenarios that we potentially wouldn't have done before. Because let's face it, even in December, if someone come up to you at your organisation and said, we need to make sure that we plan for a global pandemic that will shut down a quarter of our business, we'd have just looked at the team that asked us that, the person that asked us that, and said, well, what are you talking about? But here we are a few months later, and that's exactly what's happening. I think if you think of what DevOps is as a practice, really, as those pillars of people, process, technology, and culture as well, much like Lean was born out of the manufacturing industry, and the way Lean started and really took off, really, you know, was the ultimate shift left. Really, it went from manufacturing by hand and manufacturing everything on a manual production line, to the introduction of having a proper production line. And then as time went on, we automated more and more of that stuff. So much so that there are now lots of products out there in the manufacturing industry that don't have a human interact with them at all. You know, that is the ultimate shift left, in my opinion. It's gone from humans to robots in a lot of ways. So I think there's going to be a big shift and focus on there as well. And I think the application of DevOps outside technology is an interesting one. Obviously, some of the principles around continuous integration and deployment are very technical terms, and they've been implemented in a very technical way. But don't forget, the way both of those are implemented is fundamentally a workflow, if you think about it in a lot of ways. And think about what that means, you know, just slightly outside of there for a minute. Yes, you know, continuous integration takes our code from a repository. It does a number of things and produces an artifact so that we then drop and then we build on. But fundamentally, there are applications of that outside of technology as well. And I think with the uptake of DevOps and the buzz around DevOps still in our industry, there are going to be other parts outside of technology of business that look to DevOps to see how it can help them and how it can help them be more agile, and how it can help them improve their ways of working and improve and automate some of the things that they are doing. It's not just limited to technology. I think one of the biggest things overall, though, is you know, coming back to that word value. You know, I've had countless conversations with leaders. I've had countless conversations with C-level people that just don't understand, you know, why are we doing all of this stuff here? You know, what is the value? And I think one of the things that's going to be crystal clear is there's going to be a laser focus on making sure we deliver value at every point of the stakes, really. I think it's really important for leaders to understand what value means. It's really important for leaders to be able to understand exactly what the result of what we are doing is. It's also really important for them to understand that it is not DevOps is not a project. You don't start doing DevOps one day and finish your project and that's it. It is a continuous evolution of learning what we're doing, improving what we're doing, and moving on to the next thing. And I was taught very early in my career that you look and you solve the pain points first, the things that cause the most amount of pain. And that's exactly what DevOps does for a number of areas. And we need to be thinking around how to communicate, you know, those benefits to our leaders to make sure that they understand that, you know, this is a really key thing. And if we don't do this, you know, we will lose out to our competitors in a number of areas. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what about the wider industry? So I'm not just thinking about some real specifics, but where do we think we're going in the next few years? So, you know, I think one of the things that's going to be apparent off the back of this is most organizations are going to have a long period of reflection before they decide what to do next. So whether that's invest more, whether that's stop investment, whether that's invest heavily in specific areas, or whether that's spread that investment out evenly across, you know, numerous different areas of a portfolio. I think it's very interesting to see where that's going to go, but and you know, I honestly don't have any insight or thoughts at the minute as to what that means. I think it's too early in the year and too early to see the impact of what's been happening as to what that means for people. But there is going to be a long period of reflection, and I can see myself sat in many a meeting after this is over to discuss those exact points and where we put our investment in the coming months and ultimately years longer term. DevOps is actually already been having quite an impact in the revolution of 5G. So what 5G has really done for communication service providers, CSPs. So the adoption of DevOps is really a pressing reality for most of those, again, large organizations. So the investments that are demanded of those service providers are pretty significant. So this is why B2B customers who access IoT services will be making use of 5G's real-time network performance. It's vital. And there is a good report out there that talks about half of CSPs admitting that their current IT systems do not seamlessly link up with partners that will enable them to meet the demands of 5G. Automation and pipelines, which are used by many vendors and many of us on the call, is where DevOps has a lot to offer in that space, and tying systems together. I mean, that's a really big thing that we often forget that DevOps gives us, is that ability to make systems talk to each other through things like APIs. Okay, so multi-cloud. So multi-cloud's an interesting one. I used to work for a service provider up until September last year, and I had conversations with many people, many customers about multi-cloud, and most of them were not interested at the time. Whether that changes or not now is an interesting one. It's very interesting that there was a survey out not long ago, and that IBM found that 85% of enterprises that they asked were already operating a multi-cloud environment, and that by 2021 they predicted that number to rise to 98%. So why is that a trend to watch? So I think the ad hoc way that multi-cloud has appeared at companies, so whether it be cost saving, disaster recovery, new services, or just organic growth within certain teams, means that strategy is a top priority. And I think the key thing is really, strategies are catching up with the multi-cloud reality. So a lot of what technology is actually, in a lot of ways, if you're out at the engineering level and in a management team with technology, this will resonate very much with you, is that our strategies as technology businesses and technology teams are often playing catch up to the reality of the technology. The technology moves so fast, we often have to play catch up to match that strategy. Okay, so I think one of the other things that's going to be a big thing in there is psychological safety leads to increased productivity. So we've already talked about the increased the changing culture rather, and how important that is to DevOps. And without that change, you're still running the same broken workflow, even though you've made investments in cloud services and other technological advances. But psychological safety is a new theme when it comes to the cultural element of DevOps. It's in the accelerated state of DevOps report that's out there that you can Google and look, and there's some key takeaways that are written in the front of that report. But in brief, it really talks about being able to work and be oneself without fear of negative consequences. You think that's a really key thing about DevOps? It's blameless culture. It's around succeeding and failing as a team together, regardless of what happens. And it's about learning from our mistakes. And I think one of the key things you're going to see at the minute is, as many of us on the call are potentially worried about, our roles in the future, what it means, the businesses that we work for as a whole, are they going to come out of this? I think that psychological safety does lead to increased productivity. You feel safe in your role. You feel safe that the business is safe. You feel safe that you make a mistake, you're not going to get criticized for that. That's going to be used as a positive learning experience. All of those cultural things really make you more productive as an individual. And then one of the last points on here as well is expecting the scaling of DevOps to be a hot topic. And this goes back to my point about DevOps becoming a thing outside of technology. So, you know, I've had conversations with people in finance, HR, about automating certain processes and automating data flows. So if you've got data ops, all of these things, and now as people start to look in towards what DevOps gives us in a traditional development and an operations perspective, I think means that we're basically going to follow two elements, I think, for scaling across an enterprise: the platform teams that operate our self-service platforms, and then the communities of practice, the groups of people that learn and share insights across the whole business. And it's those people that are going to be really important in enterprises, I think, as more people start to look at what the elements of DevOps, not DevOps specifically, but what the elements of DevOps can mean to another department in terms of you know, improving what they can and can't do. Okay, so I think that's the last slide. Pretty sure. You can just try skipping on for us. It is, yeah. So, okay, so I don't know if any questions have come in. I've not been looking, if I'm honest, while I've been going through there. But if there's any questions now or any coming while we've been going through, more than happy to take them or discuss any other points a little bit more in there.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to come off mute and ask a question. I can jump back and forth on the deck if you want to refer to anything that's in the deck. But yeah, shout out to Sankara for dealing with 5, 2 Azure, 2 AWS, and 1 GCP. Wow. Okay, great. You're hardcore. Right. Anybody got any questions for Martyn?
Martyn, hi, it's Barry Chandler here. I've just got one question really in terms of like the impact to Virgin Atlantic. A lot of organisations I speak to are now working with a substantially lower budget, you know, in technology and elsewhere, you know, certainly for the rest of the year. You know, how do you think we can like leverage, like, you know, DevOps practices to you know, to alleviate some of the you know, some of the impact that could possibly have on the organisation?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. And one of the things I want to start off with by answering that is, I don't know if anyone else on the call or yourself working in aviation, but not just Virgin Atlantic, but every airline is extremely risk averse. You know, their primary job is to get people safely from A to B and keep planes in the sky as long as possible, because they don't make money on the ground. So, you know, one of the challenges we have as a technology team within Virgin Atlantic is it's all about customer experience. So all of the technology innovations that we come up with, whether it's applications that affect our cabin crew or our flight crew or our ground staff, fundamentally the impact they have, or, you know, really has to make an impact on customer experience. And that's where some of that, you know, yes, budgets have been slashed, but there has to be a fundamental improvement on the NPS score, if you're aware of what NPS is, to be able to move that forward. And I think where DevOps helps with some of this is, especially if you're quite mature in this area, I think you fundamentally have the ability to, you know, have your product teams, as it were, have your multiple groups of people working on different products, be able to add more value as, you know, with the same amount of resources. And again, that comes down to good people in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong. You know, you can't make things happen without the budget there for it to happen. There's only a set amount of time between when you start something and when it needs to be completed. But I think just the very process of Scrum, really, and agile working and breaking tasks down into smaller deliverable chunks, certainly from my experience, helps us to do more even in challenging times. And then if you think about the levels of automation that you can go to, to be able to build and then deliver this stuff to the platform, whether that be test or production or development environments. I think taking out all of that manual effort means that you're spending more time developing new features and working on releasing new features than you are handing stuff over to the operations team, or being able to take what's being developed and take what's built and release it to your platforms. Much like the video at the beginning, really, from Octopus really said, you know, do you spend all your time renaming config files and dropping files in and out? I think when you start doing that, excuse me, when you start getting into that scenario, you obviously waste a lot of time and it slows you down. So just by able to be doing things smarter and faster, but with still high quality, you're obviously able to get through more work than you would be able to without all of that waste. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, for sure. I definitely think that automation, you know, and more automation is obviously going to, you know, maximize that efficiency. One of the interesting things that I think it's worth drawing out about the whole COVID-19 and this pandemic is the importance and the power placed on communities. And I think, you know, if organisations can foster that real sense of community that that we've seen, you know, as a result of this pandemic, then I think, you know, there's potential, you know, that that coming together can create a lot of good, even without, like, you know, as big a budget. I mean, one example of that is, you know, we should really all be putting a bit more focus on treating the company's money like our own. I mean, how many organisations and teams leave the lights on in their dev test environments, you know, over the weekends and overnight, you know, and spiralling costs and that kind of thing. I think sometimes it's worth looking at how much money we're wasting rather than how much money we're making.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a really good point. I touched a little bit on communities when I was talking about scaling DevOps, but I run the DevOps community at Virgin, and you know, I schedule our sessions for people to just come and see what we're doing. We have an open area in one of the offices in Crawley, and anyone who's walking by can just feel free to come in and see what we're talking about. And I always try and relate it to stuff that they know about, because, you know, it'd be great, and I'd love to just stand there all day talking about the cool stuff we're doing with tech. But for, you know, the person in HR who has some great ideas but has no idea about the tech, that doesn't engage them. And it's getting those people engaged into your community that I think has bigger results, to your point. And those are the people and those are the groups. You know, you often hear them called guilds as well sometimes. There's a bit of a different take on it, having a guild in SAFE. But basically having those communities in place, I think exactly what you say means that people start to feel like they're a bigger part of the company, I think, in a lot of ways. And you do start to think, well, actually, if we did this, and this, you know, we only increase our customer satisfaction score a tiny bit, but we save 20% on our costs to do this, which means that we can work on other stuff. And I think those are the kinds of things that, you know, certainly the organisations that are more well versed in this kind of stuff will start to foster in the coming months and years when it comes to DevOps at their organisations. It's, you know, some of the best some of the best ideas obviously come from the people that do the job, not the technologists that are tasked with fixing the problem.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of questions have been asked in the chat. Adam asked a question: what sort of feedback have you got various departments regarding the automation of business processes? I think a few people have also sort of extended that question into sort of robotic process automation and also into sort of low code and no code. I mean, is that something you're seeing in your organisation?
Yep. So I think I saw someone flash up. I saw a comment flash up about Power Automate. So we're huge Power Platform users at Virgin Atlantic. There's actually a case study on the Microsoft website of us. And again, that's a no-code or low-code, depending on which part of the tooling you're using, way of being able to solve a business problem. And it means that those little things that the business understand way more than we do as a technology team, they just have access to consume those tools and sort that problem out themselves. You know, most of the time we don't even know that they're doing it. So that's a huge thing, I think, giving people the tools. Say, like, as a technology team, we give you this platform to be able to do what you need, but you know, we will help you with it. We will help you with best practice. We'll help you with a number of things. But there's a platform for you to go off and do it yourself. You understand it more than anyone else. You know, you have the tools now to fix your own problem effectively.
Kira asked a follow-up question there. Who's training the Power Automate users, and when it goes wrong, who is responsible? I will chip in here very quickly. Is I did have this discussion with Microsoft in some detail about how do we avoid Power Automate becoming the access database of 2025. And the actual answer was the ecosystem around the Power and the Power platform for governance is actually quite good. It was a lot better than what I thought. So they have thought that, no, we don't want to have a problem in 5 years' time where the guy who wrote that access database that now the entire business depends upon has left the company, and nobody knows what was the password he used to lock the thing. We all used to have a great sub-career in unlocking access data, cracking access databases passwords, but that goes to show how old I am. But Martyn?
You're absolutely right there. So I'm not actually on that team that work with the platform themselves, but I know we've had very similar conversations with Microsoft and challenges that we've overcome. One of the things we're doing as an organization and from an enterprise architecture perspective is making sure that we provide people with the managed tools and the managed platforms to access the data they need, so that they don't feel the need to have to go, you know, spin up something over to the left that's running on their PC and they go on vacation for 2 weeks and it stops working. You know, your traditional shadow IT kind of stuff. We're also saying that if it becomes business critical as an IT function, we will support it. It will go through operational acceptance. So we will make sure that it gets checked for, you know, all of the best practices around the Power Platform that Microsoft have no doubt talked to you as well about. You know, just making sure that we're using the right accounts to do stuff. But then we also want to make sure that we're not surfacing the same data in 16 different ways. We want it to be through one API effectively. We need to be more platform driven as an organization, reduce the number of apps. And that doesn't mean, you know, from a Power Platform perspective, we want people to be consuming that and we want people to solve their own problems. But if it does become business critical, come talk to us and we'll support it. And if it goes wrong, we'll deal with it.
Anybody else got any questions they wanted to ask, or should we wrap it up and stop the recording? All right. Well, so thank you very much, Martyn, for that presentation. There was some great feedback in the chat. We will download the video and probably upload it separately into YouTube, because trying to share cloud recordings from Zoom is a pain that nobody wants. Yeah, we've got next month we've got Derek, who's on the call by the looks of it, for Octopus Deploy. He's going to be talking about Octopus Deploy Runbook Automation, which